Welcome back to another tutorial. So in this tutorial we'll be learning how to draft a basic trouser pattern. So these are the measurements we'll be using: the waist, hip, the trouser length, ankle, knee, the thigh, and the crotch depth. So for the waist, we'll measure the front waist arc. That is this 27, which is the waist, divided by 4 plus 0.25 for the front waist arc, and for the back waist arc is 27 divided by 4 minus 0.25, while for the front hip arc 36.5 divided by 4 minus 0.25, for the back hip arc is 36.5 divided by 4 plus 0.25. So the first thing we'll be doing, we'll mark 2 inches from the top of the paper. We'll mark 2 inches. That will be the top line. So we'll draw a straight line there. The next thing is to mark the crotch depth. The crotch depth I'll be using is 11.5. The way I get the crotch depth measurement is by sitting on a flat surface, and you measure from your natural waistline to the point of the chair or the flat surface. So if you don't do that measurement, the other way for you to get your crotch depth is your hip circumference divided by 4 plus 1 inch minus the band amount you'll be using. So I'll be using 10 inches for my crotch depth now, while the remaining 1.5 will be for the band amount that I'll be using on the waist part of the trouser. So I'm going to mark the crotch depth of 10 inches from this top line. This is the top line. Next thing, I'll mark the crotch depth, and the crotch depth I'm using is 10. So I'll mark it from this top line, 10. And I'll draw the straight line. And this is the crotch depth. So the next thing I'll be doing is to mark the full length of the trouser. So the full length I'm using is 38. So I'm going to mark 38 from this top line. I'll mark 38. After marking 38, I'll mark the hem allowance, which is 2 inches. From this 38, I'll just mark 2 inches down, which will be the hem allowance. So the next thing I'll be doing is to mark half of the paper, and the width of this paper is 24.5, so half of this is 12.25. So I'm just going to mark 12.25, which is half of the paper. Now this is the front, while this side is the back. So after getting this measurement, this is the hem. To get the knee line, because this is a fitted trouser, you measure from the hem, not from the 2 inches. You measure from the hem line to the crotch depth. Whatever you get, you divide it by 2. So I'm having 28 here. 28 divided by 2 is 14. So 14 minus 1 is 13. So from the hem to the crotch, from the crotch depth to the hem, whatever you have, divided by 2 minus 1. So for me, I'm having 28. 28 divided by 2 is 14. 14 minus 1 is 13. So I'm going to mark 13 from this hemline upward. So I'm going to mark 13. And this will be the knee line. So the next thing now is to get the hip line, and to get the hip line is the crotch depth. The crotch depth divided by 3. So my crotch depth is 10. Crotch depth 10 divided by 3 is 3.3. 10 divided by 3 is 3.3. So you are going to mark, I'm going to mark the 3.3 from this crotch depth upward. So I'll mark 3.3 across the paper. So I'm going to mark 3.3 here and also on this side. And I'm going to draw the straight line. And this will be my hip line. The next thing now is to get the back hip and the front hip. So since we're using the arc, the front hip and the back hip will not be the same. So for the front hip arc is 8.75. So from this center line, I'll mark 8.75 to the front on this crotch depth line and on the top line. So I'm going to mark 8.75. 8.875. So I'll mark it here and I'll also mark it here. 8.875, and I'll draw the straight line. While for the back hip arc is 9.375. So I'm going to mark 9.375 from this center line to the back. $9.375. So that is it for the front hip and the back hip. So the next thing is to get the crotch extension. So to get the crotch extension for the front hip arc divided by 4. So the front hip arc is 8.875. That is the distance from this center line to the hip line is 8.875. So 8.875 divided by 4 will give me 2.2. So I'm going to mark 2.2 from this straight line out. So this is where the 2.2 point is here. And that's for the crotch extension for the front. While for the back, this is the back hip arc. The back hip arc divided by 2. So the back hip arc is 9.375 divided by 2 will give me 4.6. So I'm going to mark 4.6 from this point. So my paper did not get to where the 4.6 point to mark. So I'm going to add additional paper to this end here. I'm going to mark 4.6, which is the back crotch extension. I'm going to mark it from this straight line here. I'll mark 4.6. So this is the crotch extension for the back. So the next thing now is to mark the waist. So to mark the front waist arc is 7. So if you want to put that in the front waist, you can add extra 1 inch, but for me I want to be putting that, so I'm just going to mark exact 7 from this point here. I'm just going to mark exact 7. So this is where my 7 is. While for the back, before you draw the waist for the back, you come in by 0.7. From this straight line, you come in by 0.7 and you go up by 0.5, 1 inch or 1.5. Using 0.5 for this pattern, but it depends. It depends on how big the person's butt is. You can use 1 inch or 1.5. So I'll be using 0.5 here. The bigger the butt, the bigger the amount you would raise up here. So this is where the 0.5 is. So from that 0.5 point, that is where I'll mark my back waist arc, which is 6.5, but I'll be putting that at the back. So 1 inch that, so it will be 7.5 at the back. So this is 7.5 here. So I'm going to draw the straight line from this 0.5 to the 7.5 inch I marked for the back waist. You can either use a straight line or you can make it a bit curved. So that's it for the waist. So the point at which we are going to connect this waist mark to, just mark half of this crotch depth. So the crotch depth is 10, half of it is 5. So this is the 5 point here, and that's where we're going to connect both waist in the front and the back too. So I'm going to connect it this way. And I'll also connect for the back. I'll connect for the front and also for the back. I'll connect it to that half of the, I'll connect it to half of the hip depth. So that's it for the waist. So the next thing is to get the creased line, that is the center line. So we'll measure from this, for the front, we'll measure from this center line to this crotch extension for the front, and I'm having 11 inches. So 11 inches divided by 2 to get the crease line for the front is 11 inches divided by 2 plus 0.1. So it's 11 inches divided by 2 plus 0.1. That's 5.6. And that 5.6, I'm going to mark it from this straight line. I'll mark 5.6. And that 5.6, I'll mark it on this crotch depth straight to the hem line. Then I'll draw the straight line. So this is the crease line for the front. So to get the crease line for the back, I'll measure from this back extension to this center line. So I'm having 14 inches here. So 14 inches divided by 2 to get the crease line for the back. 14 inches divided by 2. 14 divided by 2 is 7 plus 0.2 plus 0.2. That is 7.2 for the back. So I'm going to measure it from this center line outward. So I'm going to measure 7.2. I'll measure it from on the crotch depth line to the hem. So I'll go ahead and draw a straight line. So that's it for the crease line at the back. The next thing is to draw this, the curve of the crotch. So to draw the curve of the crotch for the front, you first mark half of the crotch depth, which is 5. So from that 5 inches, you curve it to this, from this crotch extension, you mark in 0.5 first. You mark in 0.5. So next thing, you mark from this half of the crotch depth to this 0.5 you marked in. So that's where the crotch depth for the back would stop. So you draw the curve this way. So this is the line I'm using. I'm not using this one. So to draw the curve for the back, you also measure half of the crotch depth, which is 5, and you come in by 0.5 here on this crotch extension line, and you draw the curve from this point. You come in by 0.5 to this point, to this 0.5 point. So you can either connect it once or you connect the point twice. So that's the curve for the crotch extension at the back. So the next thing now is to mark the knee circumference. The next thing is to mark the knee circumference. So the knee circumference is 15. 15 divided by 4 is 3.75. So in the front, you mark 3.75 on both sides of the crease line. This is the crease line for the back, for the front, and this is the crease line for the back. So on both sides of the crease line, I'm going to mark in the front, I'm going to mark 3.75. Which is the knee circumference divided by 4. I mark 3.75. While for the back, I will add 0.5 to the 3.75. So 3.75 plus 0.5 is 4.25. While in the back, I'm going to mark 4.25. I'll mark it on both sides of the crease line, 4.25. For the front, I mark 3.75, which is 15 divided by 4, and I added 0.5 to 3.75 to mark the crease line for the back. So the hem or the ankle circumference is 12 inches. So 12 inches divided by 4 is 3 inches. So for the front, I'm going to mark 3 inches on both sides of the crease line in front, 3 inches. I'll mark it. While for the back, I'll mark 3.5 inches. I'm going to add 0.5 inches to the back allowance. I'm going to add 0.5 inches to the front, so it will be 3.5. I'll mark 3.5 on both sides. So now I'm going to connect the hem to the knee line. I'll connect for the front, and I'll also connect for the back. So the next thing, I'm going to connect the crotch extension in the front to the knee line. So I'm going to use this to connect it. So that's it for the crotch extension at the back. So for the front, I'm going to connect from this for the back. I'll connect it this way too. So that's it for the back. That's it for the back. So to connect this point here, I'm going to place, for the front, I'm going to place this straight ruler from this hip line to the hem line. Then I'll mark a point here, and I'll do the same thing for the back. I'll connect from the hip line to the hem line, and I'll also mark a point here. So to connect that point, I'm going to, following this point I marked here, I'll connect it straight to the hip line. Then I'll connect from the hip line. Then I'll connect from this point here straight to the knee line. So I'll do the same thing for the back also. I'll connect from this hip line to this point I marked here. Connect it to the hip line, and from the hip line I'll connect it to the hem line. Just make sure it blends inside. So for the hem, I'm just going to extend this ankle allowance straight down to the hem allowance. This ankle circumference straight down to the hem allowance. I'll do the same thing. I'll do it for the back, and I'll also do it for the front. So this is it about drafting a basic fitted trouser. So the next thing is to make sure that this time measurement, the time measurement we're having is 22.5. So you are going to make sure that the amount here is up to the 22.5. So I'm going to measure from this point to here, and from this point to this crotch extension point here. So I'm having 13.3 in front, in back. At the back I'm having 13.3. So I'll put the 30.3 on this front side, and I'll mark it to this side, and I'm having 23.5, meaning it's going to accommodate, meaning this pattern is going to accommodate my thigh circumference. So in a case where the after measuring the crotch line and it's not up to, you can either use this point here. You will no need for you to come in by 0.5. So you use this point here, and also at the front you use this, the main crotch extension at the front and at the back.